My name is Brian Hansberry. I'm the Vice President of the Schuylkill Economic Development Corporation, and I'm talking today about the Pennsylvania Industrial Development Authority's loan program. This is a loan program that was previously geared almost exclusively towards industrial and manufacturing type enterprises, but some changes recently have allowed for a greater variety of businesses to apply. The state legislature passed Act 161 in 2014 that allowed for the consolidation of 6 different loan programs under the PIDA umbrella, PIDA being the Pennsylvania Industrial Development Authority. So now under the PIDA umbrella is the Machinery and Equipment Loan Fund, the Small Business First Program, the Export Finance Program, the Community Economic Development Program, and the Pollution Prevention Assistance Account. The state passed Act 161 with the goal of trying to streamline their loan program offerings and ultimately make for a better borrowing experiences for businesses. We now have one single loan application that could be used for multiple different uses of funds. It also streamlines the guideline process. Previously, those 6 programs had 6 different set of guidelines, 6 different applications, and now that's all consolidated into one program. So for the PIDA program moving forward, the eligible businesses include basically all types of businesses. The most challenging for us to finance would be the hospitality enterprises, so restaurants, hotels, although they can fit into the program under certain circumstances. Most of the other type of loans that we see being closed nowadays are the industrial, manufacturing, agricultural, recycling, mining enterprises, service enterprises, child care enterprises. So we can serve a wide variety of customers with the new PIDA program. However, there are some limitations, and we'll talk about those a little bit more. In terms of the eligible costs for the borrowing, land, we can finance the acquisition and soft costs associated with the acquisition, so the phase 1, the appraisals, and any kind of site prep that's associated with it can also fit under the land costs. You can also renovate with this program, so if you were to purchase a building, you can make improvements to the building to fit the needs of whatever it is that your business does. You can also finance machinery and equipment, working capital, and accounts receivable. Keeping in the same line as eligible costs in terms of eligible projects, any business is eligible for land and building costs. However, mining enterprises are excluded from that. Also, any business is eligible for machinery and equipment costs. However, we exclude developers from that, and by developers we mean companies that develop real estate and ultimately lease it to an end user. Any eligible business rather is eligible for working capital and accounts receivable lines of credit, assuming that they have less than 100 full-time employees. Finally, any eligible business having less than 100 full-time employees is also eligible for the Pollution Prevention Assistance Account component of the PIDA program, which includes energy efficiency type projects and renewable energy. Some of the activities that are ineligible under the PIDA program include refinancing of virtually any kind. So any existing debt that a business may have is not eligible for refinancing. Also, any projects that have commenced prior to the approval of the PIDA loan are ineligible. There is a way to get around this, and it includes submitting what is referred to as a request for non-prejudicial approval. Non-prejudicial approval will basically allow a borrower to commence their project in advance of the approval of the PIDA loan at their own risk. So should this non-prejudicial approval be granted by the PIDA staff, a project can commence. However, there's no guarantee that the PIDA loan will ultimately be approved. But typically, in moving through the process of submitting a PIDA application, a certified economic development organization such as SEDCO would advise whether or not eligibility exists for both the business and the project itself. And if there is a fair amount of certainty that that eligibility does exist, then we would advise to submit a request for non-prejudicial approval and have a fair amount of certainty that ultimately the PIDA loan would be approved. You're also not allowed to finance projects outside of the state of Pennsylvania. You're not allowed to finance anything that would result in funds going directly to owners of the business, and you're also not allowed to relocate businesses from one part of the Commonwealth to another. However, there are some stipulations that will allow for that, and ultimately you should speak with the certified economic development organization that you're working with at time of submission to determine whether or not that would be an eligible project. Some very common restrictions on this type of financing include no delinquencies. You have to make sure that your taxes are current, and there can't be any conflicts of interest. So if you have any existing relationships with the Certified Economic Development Organization or the Department of Community and Economic Development, it's best to discuss those up front to determine whether or not they would prohibit you submitting for a PIDA loan. In terms of the amounts of borrowing on the land and building size, for most businesses, you can borrow up to $2 million. However, in some select scenarios, that is businesses located in a Keystone Opportunity Zone, businesses located in brownfield sites, or businesses located in state distressed communities, you can borrow up to $2.25 million. For agricultural producers, hospitality enterprises, defense conversion, recycling, computer-related services, child care enterprises, or construction firms, you can borrow up to $400,000. Service enterprises are eligible for up to $200,000 for land and building loans. Multi-tenant and industrial-type projects are geared for either developers or certified economic development organizations. So it really doesn't apply to most private for-profit businesses. Generally speaking, PIDA loan, while the limit may be $2 million, $400,000, or $200,000, you can only finance up to 50% of the project. So the number is going to be whatever is less, the 50% of the project, or whatever the limit it is for whichever business type you fit into. On the machinery and equipment side, could finance up to $400,000, or again 50% of the total project cost, whichever is less. For service enterprises, service enterprises can borrow up to $200,000 or 50% of the total project cost. The working capital component is something that is new under the Act 161 that was passed in 2014, and this now allows for revolving lines of credit. Revolving lines of credit are capped at $100,000 or 50% of the total amount that needs to be borrowed. Pollution Prevention Assistance Account loans, again, these are the energy efficiency loans, they're capped at $100,000 or 75% of the total eligible project costs. The collateral for PIDA loans on real estate, where loans exceed $400,000 must be secured by no less than a second mortgage. So that means that PIDA is willing to subordinate their lien position to a private lending institution, but it can be no less than a second lien position. Machinery and equipment, again, no less than a second lien position on the equipment being financed. On the working capital and line of credit component of the PIDA program, there must be a first lien position on inventory and receivables, and there could be some additional collateral required depending on the financial situation of the project. The interest rates, and these are through June 30th of 2015, so they have been reset, but they're very similar right now in July as they were at the end of June. If you want to fix your interest rate, we can do that for up to 15 years, and that interest rate would be at a 10-year Treasury yield plus 1 percentage point. You could also choose the option to fix your interest rate for 7 years at a 10-year Treasury rate, which is obviously lower than fixing at a 10-year Treasury plus 1 percentage point, and then it will reset after the end of the 7-year period. It will have an interest rate ceiling of 2 percentage points higher than the original approved loan. So if you were to fix it for 7 years at 2.25%, the highest the reset point could possibly be would be 4.25%. Equipment loans are fixed for 3% for the full term of the loan. Working capital and accounts receivable lines of credit are also fixed for 3% for the term of the loan, which again is only 1 year. And the energy efficiency type loans are fixed at 2% for the full term of the loan. An important component of the PIDA program to consider is that there is a job creation and retention component that is associated with whether or not a project is eligible to borrow. Any PIDA project requires that for every $35,000 that is borrowed, 1 job be retained. However, you can also borrow up to $50,000 if for every 1 job you create. So clearly there's an incentive here for businesses to create jobs. There are some exceptions to this. Service enterprises, agricultural producers, and the pollution prevention projects are waived of this job creation and retention component. The loan terms are pretty standard as it relates to private financing. Land and equipment, real estate can be financed for up to 15 years. Machinery and equipment can be financed for up to 10 years or the useful life of the equipment. Working capital, again, the term there is 1 year. However, that is something that can be renewed for up to 6 years. So if you do have the requirement for working capital, that is financeable for 1 year, but if you continue to have that requirement for working capital, you could renew that for up to 6 years. PIDA does charge a 1% loan approval fee for any loan greater than $400,000. Any loan less than $400,000 is waived from that fee. In terms of the application process, first and foremost, as mentioned before, the request for non-prejudicial approval should be submitted as soon as a borrower is considering the PIDA process in working with a certified economic development organization. As mentioned before, all PIDA loans must go through a certified economic development organization. In Schuylkill County, that is the Schuylkill Economic Development Corporation. Luzerne County is Greater Hazelton Can Do. In Lackawanna County, there's an organization called the Scranton-Lackawanna Industrial Building Corporation, and virtually every jurisdiction within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania has a similar organization, and the state's website, newpa.com, is the place where you can go to find who it is that your certified economic development organization is. In terms of the details of the application itself, there's going to need to be some company information provided, including the number of full-time employees operating both in Pennsylvania and across the country. There's also going to need to be some information provided about who the owner of the facility is, both the owner of the real estate and the owner of the operating company. You'll need to submit information regarding where the project is located, what type of business it is that is operating and will be the beneficiary of the PIDA funds, and then there's also a budget that needs to be completed. The budget will include not only just all of the costs, but also all of the sources of funds. So if there's private financing involved, that will need to be provided. If there's owner equity involved, that will need to be provided as well. There are several forms that are required in submitting an application. The Certified Economic Development Organization will walk you through these forms and help complete them. Some of those include a due diligence, a tax liability. This basically reinstates the fact that your taxes are current. Project narrative. This basically spells out exactly what it is that you're looking to accomplish. So if it's a real estate project, then you want to put a new roof on the building, perhaps purchase some machinery and equipment to outfit the interior of the building, and then also perhaps look to include some working capital in it. That will all be spelled out in the project narrative. Company profile sheet is a bit redundant to some of the other information that was already provided, but it's a one-page sheet and it's fairly simple to complete. A description of the geographic market area served. So what we're looking for here is whether or not you serve a very limited jurisdiction, say northeastern Pennsylvania, or whether you serve the entire country. So basically a general description of where your customers are is what this component is asking for. A business plan is only required for startups, so most businesses don't have to worry about that. Some additional information that are required, some additional forms that are required for the application. There's certification sheets that, again, the Certified Economic Development Organization will help walk you through. An individual credit report for any individual with a 20% or more ownership in the operating entity, and that only applies to businesses that have 100 or fewer employees. Terms and conditions sheet, again, the Certified Economic Development Organization will walk the borrower through that. A commitment letter is required if there is private financing associated with this. So if you are submitting a PIDA application and you also plan to borrow from a private bank, you will need a copy of the commitment letter from the bank at the time of application. Also, on real estate loans, an appraisal is required and it must be no less than 1 year old. Continuing on with the supplemental information that is required for applications for real estate loans that involve construction, you will need a copy of the sales agreement for the real estate being purchased. You also need copies of either bids or proposals or contracts from the contractors who will actually be performing the work. You'll need a phase 1 environmental assessment of the property for any acquisition. Again, this can be no less than 1 year old. A copy of a debt schedule must be provided to PIDA at the time of application. Also, personal financial statements are required for any personal guarantors that own greater than 20% or more of the operating entity. As mentioned previously, all applications have to pass through a Certified Economic Development Organization. The Certified Economic Development Organization will then review the application prior to submission to PIDA directly. In terms of the approval process, after the Certified Economic Development Organization's Board of Directors approves the loan, it is then passed on to PIDA staff. For any loan less than $400,000, PIDA staff can actually approve that directly. For anything greater than $400,000, however, the PIDA Board of Directors has to approve that. The PIDA Board of Directors meets monthly. In order to meet a submission deadline, applications must be submitted by the first business day of the month preceding the board at which approval is being requested. So if you were to try and meet a September Board of Directors meeting for approval of the PIDA loan, the application would need to be submitted by the first day of August. In terms of closing, for any PIDA loans of $400,000 or less, the Economic Development Organization that you applied through will close that loan for you. For any loans of greater than $400,000, the Department of Community and Economic Development will close those with their internal counsel. And that wraps up the presentation on the Pennsylvania Industrial Development Authority. I do welcome any feedback or questions from anyone who has the opportunity to view this webinar. Again, my name is Brian Hansberry. I'm the Vice President of the Schuylkill Economic Development Corporation. Our phone number is 570-622-1943, and our website is www.sed-co.com. If there's any questions, please feel free to reach out to me, or certainly ask the staff of the Manufacturers and Employers Association, and they can direct your questions appropriately. Thank you.